Hello and welcome to a new episode of That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. My name is Françoise, and today's episode is all about the link between trauma and fertility. It's a question I put out there on Instagram asking people if they wanted to know more about this topic, and I got back a resounding yes. And I recognized that because when I was trying to get pregnant, I had this impression myself as well that there were things going on within me that were blocking my fertility, and I couldn't really put a finger on them. But I just knew that I needed to do a lot of internal work to really prepare for conception. And that is where trauma comes in. And what I've learned since is that trauma, things that have happened to you, actually leave an imprint in your body and affect, how you experience your fertility journey. So that's what we're going to be delving into today. And I know that trauma is a bit of a complicated word to use. On the one hand, it sounds like a really big word that you may associate with war zones, with violence, with destruction, attacks. So maybe not something that might apply to you. Um, and if that's the case, then you might overlook, other sources of trauma that may be affecting your fertility. And then on the other hand, I feel that trauma is a word that's so much in fashion these days and it's being thrown around a lot. And the danger with that is that everything is then being framed in terms of trauma and we start seeing ourselves as victims all the times. We are always at risk of being triggered. And what happens then is that we don't recognize that we actually have agency over our triggers and we are not just on the receiving end. We can actively work with our traumas and triggers to create that resilience within ourselves. And I'm saying that with a lot of compassion for anyone who has gone through a traumatic event, even and especially on their fertility journey. So I'm not here to shame you. What I want to do in this episode is really empower you. And I want you to understand what trauma is so that you can recognize it within yourself, especially, as it may be affecting your fertility, and also give you the tools to work with trauma from a place of power rather than victimhood. So that will be the structure of this episode. We'll dive into what trauma is. I'll discuss how trauma works in the body, how it may be affecting your fertility, and then I'll end with a couple of practical tips on what you can do to process your trauma and your triggers. And I know that it's a lot of information in this episode. So, what I've done is I've created a PDF that gives you some additional information on how you can recognize certain types of nervous system dysregulation within yourself. That's what trauma does, is it dysregulates your nervous system. So in the PDF you'll find more information on what that may look like, and what you can do when certain types of dysregulation occur. So you can find that at thatfertilefeeling.com/nervous hyphen system. Yeah, thatfertilefeeling.com/nervous hyphen system. So what is trauma? As I mentioned, many of us think of trauma as a specific event, so that may be a car accident, a death, an abusive relationship, but it's not the events themselves that are traumatic. There's one of my favorite teachers, Kimberly Ann Johnson. She defines trauma as any experience that is beyond our capacity to handle in the moment. And that's because they're too much, too fast, or too soon, or all of the above. So anything that happens that overwhelms you can potentially be a trauma, a traumatic experience. And what I love about her work is that she really shows that it's about metabolizing these events. When we are able to metabolize them or don't, that determines whether these events they linger in our system as unprocessed material, causing that bodily response, that trauma response in the body. And I find that term she uses, metabolizing these events, really interesting because it points to trauma as something that is not static, but it's something, it's not something that has to define you forever, but it's something that can be processed. And that's also why two people can really experience the same thing or the same event completely different, and that's why you also can't compare your situation with anyone else's. I always say there's no hierarchy to suffering, there's no hierarchy to trauma, there's no hierarchy to longing. You don't have to define why something is traumatic to you, or you don't have to try and brush things away because you feel that, other people might have it so much harder than you, or might have found a way to deal with them. So you need to do that too. You are allowed to have your own unique experience because you are your own unique person. And what matters is that you just take time to acknowledge that something happened to you, that you still have a hard time dealing with that or processing that, so that you can sort of allow the underlying impulses to come to the surface, because that's where the actual healing takes place. It's when you stop pushing things away, it's when you stop looking the other way, and when you allow them to come through you. And it sounds very abstract, I know, but I'm going to talk you through this in this episode. So, how do you know if you have unresolved trauma that may be affecting your fertility? There's a very long physiological answer and a short answer here. I'm going to give you both, but let me start with the short answer so that you can, get an idea of what to look out for, and then we can turn to what happens in the body when it comes to trauma, and also how you can work with the body to process that trauma. Now, common causes of trauma are things like a shock or a significant event, an accident, an attack. Sexual trauma is something that often comes up in the fertility realm because it's so linked to the pelvic bowl and all the tension that you may be holding there. And this is probably the most, the way we usually think about trauma. But that's not all. A lot of people also suffer from developmental or childhood trauma. Now, people often think of abuse when I mention this, but that's the extreme case. Even having had like an unresponsive or emotionally unavailable parent can be a source of trauma in the body. So in my case, I know, from my body and all the work that I've done, that I've developed an avoidant attachment style. So that means that I felt, or I grew up with the idea that my parents were unresponsive to my needs. And so I try to refrain from attaching because it's not safe, because people won't give you what you need. That's my attachment style. Now, if you ask me, I actually had a good childhood, I would say. And I know that my parents did the best they could. Um, so I don't necessarily remember them as being super unresponsive. I do know like they worked a lot. Maybe our family was different in that way from other kids' families. Um, but my rational mind wouldn't say that something traumatic happened to me in my childhood. I do remember small things like them telling me that when I was little they would put me in the attic at night if I was crying so that they could sleep without hearing me. And now again, from all the work I've done, I know that in childhood development that is a traumatic event, because when you're crying, when you're a baby, you're asking for help. That's the only thing you know how, or the only way you know how. And then if your parents ignore you and you don't come, that's the message you get, right? There's no one here for me. When I need help, no one shows up. So that's not something I blame them for. I find it painful now when I think back of that little baby, but I also know that's how parenting was done those days, right? So I don't blame them, but I do understand how my blueprint was formed by, this example. There were a couple of other examples as well, tiny examples, but that did shape my blueprint around this idea that there's no one there for me when I need them. That's a traumatic imprint. Um, and for me, I do recognize it, the wanting to do things on my own, wanting to be self-sufficient, needing to be in control, constantly overgiving, not taking care of yourself. Those can all be these childhood trauma wounds. And that's the annoying thing about trauma, I want to say, is that when something stressful happens, like a fertility journey, these old wounds, they influence that. So what I could see in myself, because I don't like to rely on other people, is I really resented my doctors. I'm like belligerent when it comes to doctors because I don't feel safe when I rely on anyone else. So that's my wound, and that's something I really had to work on my fertility journey, to sort of take that edge of that interaction with the doctors and really created or start seeing it in light of we're all working towards the same goal here. Um, so we'll get to this in a second. All of these thoughts, the wanting to do things on your own, wanting to be self-sufficient, needing to be in control, constantly overgiving, not taking care of yourself, all of these things, they still affect your nervous system. They affect your hormonal balance and your ability to regulate yourself, to regulate your nervous system. All of these elements are actually crucial for fertility. But before we turn to the body, to what happens in the body, I wanted to discuss a third category. We discussed shock or significant event. We discussed childhood trauma. So a third thing that might apply to you is intergenerational trauma. Now, I was actually discussing this with my friends the other day. We are now the third generation after the Second World War. And we still carry that trauma with us, some more than others, depending on your family history. Um, if we look, and we saw some really interesting developments there. If we look across generations, so the people that were in the Second World War, especially in Europe, they lived the trauma and they were altered by it in so many different ways. And then the generation that came after that, so our parents, they were the ones who suffered the consequences because they grew up with this cloud of trauma that was there across families, across culture even. Um, Often a huge skeleton in the closet that no one was allowed to talk about. So it was really intense for them. And then what I see now in our generation is that a lot of people are now doing the work of healing that trauma and putting the past to rest. It's as if there's been enough time between the actual event, and us that we can say, okay, we see that the trauma is still there, where it's lingering in our nervous systems. It's been passed on by previous generations. And I've discussed this on the podcast before, right? That type of trauma, it changes the DNA of your mother, your mother's mother, so it's passed on through your DNA, and that affects their ability to provide emotional and physical stability at home. That has affected your ability to provide that stability and safety for yourself because it lingers in your system. It affects your hormones, your well-being, your fertility. So it's good that we're doing the work now of clearing out all of that trauma, so that it's about taking back power. It's about taking back power over your health and your life. Now, what's I called it annoying before, what we see in practice, or I see in practice with my clients, that and my own journey as well, is that all of these types of trauma can subsequently be compounded by the fertility journey itself. So there is the stress of treatment, maybe there's medical trauma, maybe you lost a pregnancy or multiple pregnancies. These are all things that can also fall under that header: too much, too fast, too soon. So you have like trauma affecting your system at the root, and then you're also going through what might be a traumatic experience on the fertility journey. And that's why I want you to know, the body has this amazing ability to regulate yourself. All it needs from you is to start noticing where it is that you're stuck, so that you can understand that you can work through the trauma. It starts with being aware of what's happening inside of you, and then you can start working with that. And it all starts with the nervous system. So how does the nervous system keep us balanced? What role does it play in trauma? When it comes to the nervous system, you need to know that there are two branches, and I'm sure you've heard this before. There's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And these systems, they're tightly linked to your survival instincts. So you may have heard about the fight or flight response before. That's the sympathetic nervous system. That's the part of your nervous system that helps the body deal with immediate threats. It keeps you up. It sends all of this energy to your muscles so you can start running. Your heart rate goes up. You become alert. That's the survival response, the fight or flight response. And then you've probably heard about the parasympathetic nervous system as the part of the nervous system that responds after the threat has passed. So it helps the body calm down and recover. It's called the rest and digest, or the feed and breed response. That's why this response is so important for fertility. It's in the recalibration that takes place here in the parasympathetic nervous system that creates optimal conditions for fertility. But this is a bit of a false dichotomy, because both of these systems can respond to a threat, and both of these systems also have like a function in normal life. The nervous system doesn't just keep you safe. It's more than a response to threats. It's basically the link between your brain and your body. So what the nervous system does is it controls your organs in a sense. It gives signals from your brain to your body, to your organs, and they work in opposite directions. So that the sympathetic nervous system is the gas pedal, and then the parasympathetic system is the brake pedal. And you need both, right? You need your system to be activated in the morning. So that's when your heart rate gets up, you start moving, and then you want it to shut down again at night. That's the parasympathetic mode. So together, these two systems, they work in harmony to bring balance to the body. Um, and when they are not balanced, that's something you can actually measure through heart rate variability. This is a term that I'm going to be mentioning a lot throughout the remainder of this episode because it's such a crucial measure for the state of your nervous system, and it has direct implications for your fertility. So what is heart rate variability? You know, your heart, it beats at a specific rate at all times, and that rate changes depending on what you're doing at the time. So when you're resting, your heart rate slows down. When you're stressed, or when you're active, or when you're in danger, or when you're exercising, your heart rate goes up. Um, that's your nervous system at work. Your senses, so sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, they feed information to your brain about everything around you. And then your brain, through the nervous system, it communicates with your heart, and it tells your heart that it needs to speed up, work harder, or slow down. Now, what you want to have, and this for me it sounded a bit paradoxical, but you want to have high heartbeat variability. What that means is that your body is switching between the gas pedal and the brake pedal a lot, right? Your heart rate goes up when it needs to, it goes down again when you're resting. That's a healthy, functioning nervous system. Um, high heartbeat variability means that your body is constantly adapting to changes in the environment. It just knows how to respond to whatever is going on around you. It knows when it needs to speed up or slow down, so it's resilient. And I love this because it's such a great metaphor for balance. It's not stress that we need to worry about. It's not that we need to worry about triggers. It's that we need to worry about our ability to respond to those triggers. That's what creates the difference in your system. So when you have high heart rate variability, your body is able to respond to whatever is going on around you. Now, what trauma does is it keeps you stuck in either a state of nervous system overstimulation or understimulation. So that means that your nervous system and your body are just less able to find their way back into balance. So, overstimulation, we just discussed, right? That fight or flight response. So, if this is something that's active in you all the time, you will basically have a higher heart rate most of the time. Your body is just unable to calm itself down. There's also a parasympathetic response to trauma and stress. We haven't discussed that yet, but you have to. So, the fight or flight response, that's the sympathetic response. But when the parasympathetic nervous system responds to a threat, it's called a freeze or a fawn response. In a freeze, your body just collapses. This is like an animal pretending to be dead. Sometimes, the threat is so overwhelming, there's no way to run, there's no way to fight, so you just collapse. Another thing that you can do is fawn. This is actually what I was taught during my training as a conflict researcher. That was my previous job. When you're in a hostage situation, for example, what you want to do is play really nice. You don't want to attract any attention to yourself. You are sinking into the carpet. No one is noticing that you're around because that is what's going to keep you safe. And this is something that a lot of women do. They've been taught that in order to keep safe, they have to be like the good girl all the time. So that's about holding yourself back, keeping it all in. Um, it's a parasympathetic response, and it means that you're stuck in a state of understimulation. You're repressing all of those, you're repressing your own intensity. So, what you might experience then are feelings of numbness, of apathy, of helplessness, and in terms of the heart rate, will probably have like a slower heart rate as your body is not able to arouse itself. So in both of these cases, the overstimulation and the understimulation, you don't have a lot of heart rate variability because your heart rate is either sort of consistently, very high when you're stressed or very low when you're holding it all in. I've done a number of episodes already on the link between stress and fertility, but here I just wanted to zoom in a little bit more about what research says about the link between heart rate variability and fertility. Now, this is a relatively new field of study, so obviously more research needs to be done. But what is coming out so far is very telling about the role that the nervous system plays in fertility. I came across one study that was published 5 years ago in 2019, where researchers found that this heart rate variability could be used to predict pregnancy outcomes in women undergoing IVF. So, women with higher heart rate variability, women with more regulated nervous systems, they had better pregnancy outcomes in IVF. While a decrease in heart rate variability after embryo transfer correlated with a reduced likelihood of pregnancy. So again, it's not stress that has the effect on fertility here, it's your ability to handle that stress, the way you regulate yourself. Another study published in 2024 also found that a lower heart rate variability, so more imbalanced nervous system, in women with PCOS. A 2023 study argued that nervous system imbalance could potentially worsen stress and inflammation in women with endometriosis. So these studies both found this bidirectional link almost between these conditions and the nervous system. It's a negative feedback loop where the condition worsens because of the effect on your nervous system, which subsequently influences your body again. Um, it's not only women who should care about their nervous system, because a 2021 study found that poor semen quality was also correlated with decreased heart rate variability. So men who had more, who showcased a higher level of dysfunction of the nervous system also had poor semen quality. So very important, this nervous system. Really, I feel this is one of the crucial pieces of the puzzle that we're missing when we're looking at fertility. What can you do, right? What we've discussed so far is that we've all experienced some kind of trauma in our lives. A trauma that remains unprocessed can put your nervous system in this under or overdrive, and nervous system imbalances have a negative effect on fertility. So you want to be able to address these imbalances. Now, an important thing you can do, and this is really the foundational work, is to create safety in the body. And I just recorded, coincidentally, an entire episode. I published it last month. It's episode 101 on lifting yourself up when your fertility journey gets you down. There's so much information in there about how to create a solid foundation of safety within yourself. So what you want to do is you want to invest in things that help you regulate your nervous system, on a daily basis, so that your baseline is one of safety. Your body knows every day that, okay, things happened in the past, but now I'm safe. You can find all of that in episode 101. One thing I'll just point out here is that you want to create a library of glimmers. So what you want to do is look on a daily basis at the micro moments in your life that bring you joy. And it can just be things like feeling the sun on your skin or having a good conversation. That's the things you're going to want to have more of in your life. You want to be aware of those. When you sit in the sun, you actually want to take in that feeling of pleasure, because that tells your body that you're safe. Pleasure is an important source of safety for the body. So maybe you want to write those moments down on a daily basis, see what brought you joy. Maybe you think of 3 things that were really nice before you go to sleep. And once you know what brings you joy, you can start incorporating more of those things in your day. It sounds super simple and it's so transformational. Just remember, joy equals safety. And you can feel in your body if that feels true to you. Joy equals safety. What happens in your body? Can you feel it relax? And maybe it doesn't feel true, right? Then you might want to look at deeper sources of trauma that are causing this dysregulation within you. We'll get to that in a second. But this is the first step. Create safety by focusing on glimmers. Now, the second step is that you want to learn how to upregulate or downregulate your system. This is something I actually learned while I was working as a conflict researcher. We had these trainings where they taught us how to survive in war zones, basically. So we were put in like hostage situations, play acted, of course, but so that you can really experience what that does with your stress levels and sort of play around with that and see, okay, what makes me feel in control right now? Because that's the first thing, is seeing that you're stressed and then not responding from the place of stress, but knowing what you can do to come back to your center first and live and act and respond from that place of safety and control. For your fertility, it's the same principle. You want to be able to notice if your nervous system is overactive or underactive. So if you're in a fight or flight mode, or if you're in this freeze or fawn mode, and then you can subsequently take steps to regulate yourself. Now, how do you know if you're over or under regulated? There's so many different ways in which this can present. So I created a separate PDF where I list all of them, all of the different signs and symptoms. You can find that at thatfertilefeeling.com/nervous system. But what I'll do now is I'll give you a couple of examples so that you can try to start recognizing this for yourself. So overregulation, let's start with that one. That's, fight or flight. So a, one way in which the fight response can present itself is in thoughts like, I'm going to do everything possible to fix this. Can you just tune into your body again and feel what happens when you say this? I'm going to do everything possible to fix this. Do you feel how you tense up? That the nervous system is activated? Or does it make you feel relaxed? That's something, there's no absolute truth here. Just see what happens in your body when you say that. Another example of overregulation, a flight response. I need to get away from all of this and focus on something else. Again, can you just tune into your body and feel what happens when you say this? I need to get away from all of this and just leave treatment, focus on something else. Can you feel that sense of tenseness, of desperation? That's nervous system overregulation. Or maybe it just feels right and you need to leave treatment, right? Again, there's no right answer. There's no judgment for having these thoughts. These are completely normal thoughts when you're in a situation like yours. What I'm saying is that these thoughts are signals that you can act upon. You don't have to believe them. You can create a little bit of distance between yourself and these thoughts, and you can use them as a source of information. What are some of the things that you can do when your nervous system is overregulated? One thing that you should know is that it's also like a bidirectional circuit. So your nervous system, it influences your breath, your heart rate, your movement. So that also means that you can use your breath, your movement, your awareness to influence the nervous system. It goes both ways. So there's again more examples in that PDF, but I'm going to give you two important ones now. Shaking. Shaking is a good way to get all of those intense emotions out of your system. So whenever you feel overregulated, just put on some music and start shaking. Another practice is something called exteroception. So what that means is that you shift your attention outward to the place that you're sitting in, and you just start naming all of the objects that you see. And you try to feel the distance between yourself and the objects, and you try to feel where you are in relation to those other objects in your space. So you bring your attention out of your body. And you keep doing these things, either the shaking or bringing the attention out of your body, until you feel a shift within yourself and you notice, that you've gotten out of your mind and into the present moment. That's two things, but there's much more in the PDF. But those are two things you can do to address that overregulation. I'll also give you an example of underregulation, so the freeze response. Maybe you know this thought: I don't know what to do next. Nothing seems to work, and I feel completely stuck. Maybe just close your eyes, not if you're driving, but feel it in your body. Nothing seems to work. I'm completely stuck. I don't know what to do next. Can you feel how your body shuts down when you really let those words sink in? That's the freeze response. Interestingly enough, shaking also works when you're underregulated. So maybe just shake all the time. But no, it's a different type of shaking. You might want to put on some music, dance, jump, shake, really feel that you get that energy moving again, and feel alive again, or do something else that makes you feel alive. Go ride a roller coaster, plan a fun date with your partner, anything that gets you excited. You want to get that heart rate up again. You want to get out of that slump, really. You'll find more examples in the PDF. Now that we've discussed creating that baseline sense of safety in the body, learning how to downregulate and upregulate yourself, you probably feel that there's a piece that's missing still, right? Because what none of these things do is that they get to the root of your pain, which is that you're not getting pregnant. That's why you're having all of these thoughts. So if you're just doing the nervous system work, you're not solving anything, right? It's just addressing symptoms. In the end, what you want to do is get to the trauma underneath, because all of these thoughts, they come from a place of trauma. It is possible to get to a state of trust in your journey, your fertility journey, surrender, confidence. I know that because that's been my own journey, right? So I can tell you that with confidence, it is possible. Even after 10 years of trying to conceive, it was possible for me. But I needed to get to the trauma first. The trauma that informed all of those thoughts, all of those strategy, all of that nervous system dysregulation, that characterized my journey along the way. I discussed the fight response before. This is the one that's closest to my case. And something that I see in a lot of my clients is that this fight response, the wanting to do everything that you can to fix your fertility, it's something I see a lot in type A personalities. People who want to be in control, who want to perform really well, myself included. And underneath their personality is often a trauma of not being worthy of love, of attention. It's this need to be in control. It's a need to be perfect. It's a need to be able to rely on yourself because that's safe and that's how you're loved and that's how you won't be rejected. I'm not saying that this is always the case. It's really every individual is different. So what I always do is that we look at what's presenting in the body right now and we see how we can trace that back to some sort of original event. But the beauty of working with the body is that we don't really have to go fully into what happened with you. I gave that example of the start of my own childhood. Like, I don't know what happened there. There are a couple of examples. It doesn't even matter. All that matters is that I start to recognize the trauma in my body, see what's there, and give myself what I need to work through that. And your body has the answers. The body can tell you what you need to do to heal that wound. And this is, this is a lot of work. This is not something that I can explain in 5 minutes on a podcast, but I'm going to give you a point where you can get started. A great time to look at these trauma wounds is your luteal phase, so the 2-week wait basically, or whenever you feel you're spiraling. Now, what you don't want to do during these phases, either during the 2-week wait or when you're spiraling, you don't want to work with these traumas straight away because that's too much. They're so overwhelming. If you're really spiraling, I have an episode, I think it's episode 35. I'll put it in the show notes where I actually discuss what to do when you're spiraling. What I want you to do whenever this happens during the 2-week wait or when you're spiraling is sit down and write down your thoughts. What are the thoughts that are coming up? What are the things that give you so much pain and stress? Write those down. That's where it all starts. It starts with recognizing those thoughts. And then you take a different moment. Menstruation is actually a good time to work through some of these things because you're already really vulnerable and open. But just take a time when you feel safe. Otherwise, you do it during your follicular phase, when you feel safe and composed. And then you start sitting with these thoughts. You see and feel what they do in your body. It's like tracing a trail of breadcrumbs. You see what appears in the body, what wants to be noticed. And then the next step, but this can be tricky, you might need some help. Someone's help with this is then you start asking your body what it needs. One thing I want you to be really careful with is that when it starts to feel overwhelming, when you feel like you're starting to dissociate, you're starting to run away from that feeling, go back to your regulating exercises. It's not like, especially for the type A personalities, it's not like you sit down, you do this. Okay, this is working with the body. So you only go as far as feels comfortable. You only go as far as you feel that you can carry yourself. And when you feel it's too much, you stop, you go back to your regulating exercises. You seek the help of someone, like myself, who's trained to safely work through the trauma with you. Don't re-traumatize yourself because you want to fix something. This is about opening up a dialogue with your body. It's about creating a partnership and working from there. We're not going to wreck. It's not Miley Cyrus on a wrecking ball, right? I had a teacher who worked like that, but that's often it's way too much. So take it slow. Be really, really kind to yourself. So there was so much information. I hope it was helpful. And because it's so much information, like I said, I summarized it in a PDF. You can find it at thatfertilefeeling.com/nervous-system. I might do a masterclass in the near future. Well, we'll dive a little bit more into this trauma work. But if you sign up for the PDF or if you download the PDF, you need to give me your email address and I'll send you the information. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I feel like this is actually the core of my work, and I've never really recorded a podcast about this before. So I'm happy that you got to listen. Let me know what you thought, okay? I always love to hear from you. So send me an email at francoise@thatfertilefeeling.com or send me a DM on Instagram at thatfertilefeeling. I always love to hear from you and I always get back to you and hope to see you back in 2 weeks. Bye bye.